I want to thank everyone for joining us for this latest Innovation Leaders online networking event. These events have been very well received. People have gotten a lot out of them. It's a great way for everyone to get to know each other. The idea here is to help create opportunities for each other by getting everyone to know each other better and what your expertise is, that you can become resources for each other, and possibly even potentially collaborate and partner with each other in the future. And also it serves to help broaden our perspectives and our expertise, which makes us better experts. We don't know what we don't know. And also most of us are very focused on either specific innovation expertise, or within specific countries, or within specific industries, or we work with specific companies. This is a chance for you to hear people who work outside of those boundaries and get a broader perspective, and also a chance for you to check your perspectives against others. I am going to ask you to mute your microphones while you're not talking, because the background noise can interfere with whoever's speaking. You can do that by clicking on the microphone symbol or phone symbol that's next to your name in the GoToMeeting control panel. This session is also being recorded, and later after the meeting I will send out a summary of the meeting with links to the recording for the event and with links to the presentation materials as well. So you'll have a chance to review this once again, and if you feel you missed anything or you would like to just hear it again to solidify what you've learned. So we will start off with introductions of the members, and then we'll move on to the presentations. We've got a great topic, which is what are the most important things CEOs/divisional presidents should do to create a sustainable innovation culture that they do not tend to do. We hear all the time that it's much easier to create innovation from the top down than it is from the bottom up. But believe me, it's not that easy to create innovation from the top down either. And often we have to kind of lead the top in how to improve the innovation practices and culture and processes within the organization. And so the purpose here is to broaden our knowledge and perspectives and thoughts and give us new ideas for what we can do to help our leaderships and the leaderships we work with to create a sustainable innovation culture. And the idea is to get some different thinking and some different ideas than what we're used to hearing. To do that, we have two presenters who have both dealt with CEOs and have a huge amount of experience with creating innovation cultures all over the world, not just within the U.S. And those two individuals are Douglas Kirkpatrick, who's the U.S. partner for the New Focus Strategic Group, and Ron Porter, who's the president of Porter Advisory Services. I also want to do something a little bit different today than we've done in past events. After these two individuals have presented, I would like each of you to consider what you would tell a CEO that maybe these two gentlemen haven't covered. You may have your own thoughts. Let's get them out, and at the end of this, after they've presented, you don't have to talk, but please do while you're listening, think about what is it you feel should be told to the CEOs and divisional presidents as well, and we'll see if we can get some additional ideas and have some discussion around that. All right, I'm going to ask each participant to introduce him or herself. You'll have up to 1 minute to review your backgrounds and to explain what your services and expertise are. And in addition, if you need help with something, please take an additional minute or two to explain how you need help. If people can provide that help right now, we can take a little bit of time to provide that, or people can get back to you after the event, and you can talk about that online. You can all use the GoToMeeting window chat window to also communicate. Please forward your ideas, your thoughts, your comments on what you're hearing. If you have questions, please post those as well. If you have any constructive feedback, go ahead and post it. But while the people are presenting, please hold your comments. And after each presenter is finished, you will have a chance for Q&A. Okay, we've got a big group, and about 28 people or so have registered for this event. Not everyone is able to participate. Some of these people have already indicated that they were not able to attend, but they will be listening to this event once they get the link to the recording for the event. So why don't we get ourselves started? Anita, will you please start us off? You need to unmute your microphone.
Hello to everyone.
Everybody's talking at one time, huh?
I asked Anita. Anita, you get your chance later.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello. Okay, hello to everyone. I joined the group yesterday, so yesterday I'm the member of the Innovation Global Network, and I hope, really, as Arthur said, that we can all benefit from each other, as we are with all different skills and experiences and academic training, and I am looking forward to work with most of you. My background is a PhD in material science and chemical engineering, and mostly over 10 years of experience. I have more than 10 years of experience, mostly in new product developments or existing products improvements, proprietary materials development, whole product testing, prototyping, positioning of certain ideas, how competitive landscape, competitive product landscaping, and etc. Also, I have helped many companies to, when you position the idea and how to be different than the competitors and still address certain consumers, customers' needs or market needs or the business strategy to address. Mostly have been working as a scientist, senior scientist, new product development for big and small startup companies. And from 2 years ago, I started my own consulting company, mainly in scientific and technical consulting services. That's 50% of my business activities. The other 50% I'm working on my ideas or on my innovations, mostly in the consumer products. Few of the innovations that are ongoing and that I might need help from the participants in these meetings in near future is on topical formulations, cosmetics formulation. It's not, let's say, that we need protection from UVA and UVB. Nowadays, the science and the modern techniques are telling us that the infrared and visible light is also damaging for our skin and hair, and also the air pollution. So I'm working on formulation to address, to protect the skin, not just from UV, but beyond the UV. The other products that I'm working is functional food, how we can eat snacks, small treats or desserts, but with targeted well-being or health benefits. So just two of the inventions are what I mentioned today are part of my business. The other part is consulting services, scientific and technical services. And I'll stop here and we can communicate after this meeting more if you have particular questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Sounds like you're working on a lot of very interesting things.
Yeah, different things, yes. Thank you.
Bruce, your turn.
Sorry, Arthur, I just need to make sure I got myself off the mute. I assume you can hear me now.
Yes.
This is Bruce Yonder, and I lead InnovaSpec Consulting or Innovation Specification. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and my particular interests are both agile and lean innovation, both looking to really try to speed things up versus skipping steps, making sure that things are done in the right order to get them done right the first time. I I'm based in Wisconsin, though I end up consulting between North America and Western Europe. I also do a lot of work in paper forest products, both as a technical expert on paper making and understanding the business processes along with that as well. So find myself doing a lot of both between innovation and the technical / business for paper. So if anyone has interests in that particular area, I'd look forward to talking to them.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Bruce. Dave, your turn.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm David Modeste. I'm a chemical engineer by background. I have spent most of my time in process design and process development, and especially in the area of energy efficiency around chemical processes. So my big interest around innovation is how do I get groups of engineers and other folks around the process industries engaged in ideation and sort of new innovations around how we can improve the energy efficiency of processes and new techniques that will allow, you know, not only the chemical industry, but others to take advantage of our, you know, general push away from fossil fuels towards maybe more renewables. So how I feel that this group can help is not only in some of the innovation and ideation techniques that are available. I'm sure as many of you have already practiced some of these. There might be some good guidance that you can give somebody like me who's a little bit new into this area, and also whatever ideation that I can contribute, I'd be glad to do that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, Manuel, your turn.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Can
Emmanuel.
you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Yeah. I'm an assistant chief research officer at the National Center for Technology Management here in Nigeria. I have strong interest in technology and innovation management. We do consultations for the private sector and some other levels of government, the federal, state, and the local government. We also consult for firms. We do research. We review policy research in science, technology, and innovation in Nigeria. I have strong interest in innovation management, innovation and technology management, and we will want to collaborate with anyone who is ready there to work with us. Thanks.
Okay. JC, your turn.
Okay. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm JC Paradise. I'm a business transformation and new product innovation leader, and I've worked for over 20 years in the communications, high technology, and the pharmaceutical industries. I help new and established companies respond to increased competition, greater customer demands for value throughout the customer relationship, and the ongoing need to constantly improve their productivity. I do this by usually coming on board in a leadership role and developing and redefining their key business processes from a customer perspective. Once again, I'm JC Paradise, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I've learned and hopefully learning some best practices from everyone else on the group. Thank you.
All right. Cheryl?
Hello, everyone.
Whoa. A lot of static on your end, Cheryl.
I'll call in by
Okay,
phone.
that's better. It's gone.
Better now?
No, it's there again. All right.
Oh, I'll call in by phone.
Okay, go back in. All right. Still, static is there. Hold on. All right, Joel, I think it's coming from your microphone. All right. Hopefully we'll get that cleared up. Meanwhile, Kamlesh, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kamlesh Pandey from Bombay, India. Basically, I am a postgraduate, that is Masters in Technology and Mechanical Engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. And I have 35 years of experience in industry in sectors like power, energy, nuclear, defense, and automotive. My areas of working have been engineering, R&D, involving thermal systems, thermohydraulic systems, computational fluid dynamics, innovation management, especially constraint-based innovation. That is what we people in India are really interested in. Knowledge management and especially new product development. For the past 15 years, I am also closely involved and associated with higher technical education in India and industry institute collaboration. And I am also participating through task forces set up by Confederation of Indian Industries. Have been visiting and adjunct professor in different engineering and management institutes. And I'm also on the panel of reviewers of Research Technology Management and ASME Journal of Heat Transfer, and also on the core group of a jury panel of committees set up by Confederation of Indian Industries for Industry Innovation Awards. However, currently my focus is on two things. One is making higher technical education much more industry oriented and innovative. And as a part of this, year before last, I founded a group known as Maitri, which means in Indian language, friendship, and which is also an acronym for making academia innovative and technically relevant to industries. And my second area of focus is helping medical practitioners, that is doctors, upgrade their proficiencies and services, develop low-cost products and systems relevant to Indian needs. And as a part of that, I have also established a group known as K-Search. And Search, S-E-A-R-C-H, is again an acronym of people, surgeons, engineers, anthropologists, researchers, clinicians, and hospital staff. My main intention in sharing this with this group is I would be very happy to interact with members, especially interested in these two areas, and bring in focus the constraint-based innovation that we people are interested in India, and what sort of skills and competencies are required, and how do we tackle constraint-based innovation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Ron Bates, your turn at bat. All right. Ron, do you hear me? Okay. Sharon? Up. Okay, Ron. Sharon, why don't you go, and then Ron, you can speak, okay?
Okay.
So first of all, I want to say, what fun. I'm so glad you put this together, Arthur. It's really cool. So I'm Sharon Livingston. I'm president of the Livingston Group for Marketing, and my specialty is in deep dive insight mining. And, you know, Dave, when you were talking about creative ideation for innovation, I've been doing that for years. I sent you a private note to tell you I could certainly talk to you about it, help you with it. So I do deep dive insight mining for, you know, Fortune 500s, a lot of pharmaceutical, but also with kids, also with CPG, also with media and entertainment. So my range is broad, but there's a lot of work with pharmaceutical companies. Recently, I've started a new endeavor, which is I have a PhD in psychology, and I'm a trainer of coaches. So I've been helping people to think through what they want to be when they grow up, because every time we go through some major transformation in our careers, all of a sudden there we are again looking to see what that is. So I have programs where I help people think through who they want to be and how they want to use their strengths, and maybe direct them towards another targeted goal with their career. And I've had a lot of experience in new product development, problem solving, and I love my work. So
I've worked with Sharon for a very long time. She's a dynamite individual. She's one of the premier qualitative research facilitators in the country. So if you're interested in learning, want someone to help you with coach you on how to better use your skill sets, please do give Sharon a call. Okay.
thank you.
All right, Brian Freed, are you? Can you speak?
Yep. Hi, Arthur.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Brian Freed. I'm an inventor, entrepreneur. I have products out in the market right now in Walmart and QVC. I've been on air QVC. I've hosted a radio show since 2009 called Got Invention Radio, and I've had a lot of the Shark Tank type of people, and Hasbro and ThomasNet and LegalZoom and Johnson & Johnson and all those fun guests I've had on. I authored 2 books called, one is called Inventing Secrets Revealed, that was published last year, and before that it was You and Your Big Ideas. And what I've been doing since I started to have some level of success bringing products out is I've been coaching and navigating through the invention process for inventors for over 15 years. And you can take a look at my website, brianfried.com. Just spell it right. It's BRIANFRIED.com. If you spell my first name, Brain, and you say my last name the way it's spelled, then I'm Brain Fried. So maybe that's an easy way for you to remember. But it's nice meeting you. I guess everybody has different specialties and levels, and it's very nice to meet everybody and network. And I leave off with saying keep on inventing.
Okay, thank you. Ron Bates.
Hi, this is Ron Bates. Glad to be here and meet everyone today. I spent the bulk of my career, almost 40 years, in general foods and craft, and spent quite a bit of that time working with the innovation teams using quantitative methods as in terms of looking at relative profitability of new product ideas. Since I retired, I've been spending time as an independent consultant, working with former colleagues, and really expanding my scope of activity beyond food into automotive and other areas. So glad to be here, glad to contribute, and thank Arthur, as always, for setting up this group.
All right, thank you. Joel, want to give it one more shot?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Joel Rubenstein. I am currently at GlaxoSmithKline in a global marketing role with a predominant focus on, probably over half of my time is spent on innovation projects. I've spent most of my career, going on 20 years now, in OTC medicines, either at Pfizer, Novartis, now Glaxo. I actually, straight out of business school, had the opportunity to sit back and learn how to do this process from a guy named Arthur Fox many years ago. So it's good to hear that voice again. I did leave traditional healthcare marketing for a couple of years and decided to do other things. Actually spent a couple years in the sustainability group in paper goods down in Georgia Pacific in Atlanta, which was an amazing learning experience for a couple years. I then actually led a small brand strategy consulting team for Nielsen for a couple years, and most uniquely, I have probably already done my dream job, but I spent a little over 3 years running the sales and marketing department for the largest salmon farming company based in Scotland, which was an absolute dream job for 3 or 4 years. Absolutely loved it, but had to come back to reality, and that's where I am now.
Joel's a brilliant marketer. It's a real pleasure to have him as part of our group and participating in this event. It's good to hear your voice too again, Joel.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, and Doug and Ron, will you can introduce yourselves right before your presentations, and which we're going to go to right now. So, Doug, I'm making you the presenter.
Great.
So why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll get started.
Okay. Doug Kirkpatrick. Thank you very much, Arthur, for the opportunity to share today. I'm a partner in New Focus Strategic Group, and our practice is helping organizations transition from rigid, bureaucratic, hierarchical command and control entities to flexible, agile organizations that provide people with freedom and autonomy to do their best work. So I've written a book called Beyond Empowerment, The Age of the Self-Managed Organization. I have a TEDx talk on the same topic, and I spend about half my time evangelizing, speaking, presenting all around the world and all across the USA, and the other half of the time is spent doing boots on the ground consulting with organizations in transition. So I just got back from Siberia 2 weeks ago, and this seems to be a global phenomenon. Interest seems to be accelerating, and so it's an exciting time to be alive. So should I jump into the presentation at this point, or what's the?
Yes, go right, jump right in.
Let's go. So what are the most important things that CEOs and divisional presidents should do to create a sustainable innovation culture that they do not tend to do? I think there are 3 things. And I'm not sure why my screen is not advancing. There we go. I hit that. Okay. I think the first thing is we should organize for freedom. And many people do not do that because they are comfortable in bureaucracy. Secondly, we need to watch language because language leads to culture. Culture drives mindset, and mindset creates environments that either allow for innovation or not. And thirdly, we need to be aware of new social technologies, which are not necessarily new, but they are severely underutilized and underused and completely available to drive innovation in organizations. And trying to advance the slide once again. There we go. So this is a very simple diagram. If I ask people to guess what this is, they would probably guess, well, it's 2 bent lines, and that would be absolutely correct. But it actually represents something more significant than that. This is actually, when packed with the correct genetic material, it represents the entire genetic structure of a fern. And it's also known as a fractal because when you look at a fern at any degree of magnification, you see the same 2 bent line shape wherever you look throughout that system. And so the system itself is based on very simple structures, essentially boiled down to 2. And whether that system becomes a single leaf or a frond or an entire forest primeval of ferns depends on its ecosystem. Depends on the amount of soil, and the amount of nutrients in the soil, the degree of sunlight, the degree of moisture, the environment itself. And so nature calls us to ask some questions about human organizations. And one question that springs to mind is, can we create human organizations that allow people to thrive, to experience freedom and autonomy, to do their best work, to provide leadership, and to drive innovation? Can we have organizations which allow for innovation from any place at any time? And the answer is, I think we can. And so in terms of that, I can relate a story that I'm personally familiar with. In the spring of 1990, there was a small band of colleagues working out of a little farmhouse in Northern California. And they've been called together by an entrepreneur named Chris Rupert to work on a state-of-the-art food processing facility. And I know about this because I was there. I was the financial controller of the project. And we were working in this little farmhouse in the spring of 1990, and one day our founder came in and said, you know, let's have a meeting and talk about how to establish the governance of the enterprise. So we said, sure, and we all met that night in a dusty construction trailer out on the job site, and our founder passed out a document called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. So the project was called Morningstar, and we were engaged in tomato processing. And principles basically boiled down to two things. The first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And when we think about it, that's the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. So every law against assault and battery and theft and burglary and kidnapping and murder and all the rest is founded on the are predicated on the principle that people should not use force against other people. And you can understand how profound this principle is, because if you imagine a world where everyone adhered to that principle, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And we know that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is that the closer we get to that ideal state, the more happiness, harmony, prosperity, and innovation that we experience as human beings. And the second principle is that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. And this is also foundational to law, especially civil law, and in particular contract law, which would be meaningless unless parties kept the commitments that they make to each other. And so armed with these two principles, we went on to construct our factory, and we had hundreds of workers working 24/7 on the job site. We had tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California. We had vital equipment on ocean cargo freighters from Italy. And finally, on July 16th of 1990, we threw the switch. We made 90 million pounds of tomato concentrate for the world market, and we disrupted the entire industry virtually overnight. And we did it without any human bosses. Everything was based on the governance of those two core principles, just like a fern is based on two bent lines. And so we found that we can manage enormous complexity with great simplicity. And we found also that we could unlock innovation from any point in the enterprise at any time. So as an example, a couple of years ago, we had a mechanic that theorized a superior way to handle bulk materials, in particular chemicals. And he freely walked around and talked to stakeholders in the existing process, and talked to a financial colleague to obtain financing, and talked to some engineers to refine his diagrams, and implemented a project which saved millions of dollars in 3 months with a 200+% return on investment in 3 months. So what we found is that innovation can spring forth freely from anyone in anyone's mind at any time, anywhere. And that was a powerful lesson that we've learned over the last 28 years in this organization. By the way, this company grew to become the largest tomato processor in the world, and all of you have eaten our product because it goes into everything in the grocery store, from Heinz ketchup to Campbell's soup and everything else you can imagine. And we've never deviated from our two core principles, which represent the corporate DNA, just like the two bent lines represent the entire DNA of a firm. So creating organizational systems that allow for innovation to freely spring forth is one of the powerful lessons I think CEOs and divisional presidents can certainly learn from. Not that they have to base their entire governance on two core principles, but that it is definitely possible to create these kinds of ecosystems where people are free to do their best work. As another point, this is the actual org chart of Morningstar taken a few years ago with digitized peer agreements that were projected in three-dimensional space. And so people are connected via a network. There's no up or down. There's no boss. There's no hierarchy. In fact, if this were a time-lapse movie, it would be in constant motion as people enter and exit the ecosystem and reconfigure and renegotiate their roles and responsibilities dynamically. So it is very possible to create environments where people are free to innovate at a rapid rate and with great results. The second point is that we need to watch our language, because language really drives culture, and culture drives mindsets, and mindsets drive results and innovation. And so most of us, many of us, and most organizations possibly carry around the baggage of industrial age command and control language. And so we have a vocabulary that consists of things like human resources. We talk about headcounts, direct reports. The word employee itself, if you look at the actual dictionary definition, means someone who works for another person for pay. And I would hazard a guess, if you did a survey of millennials today, very few of them would say that their purpose in life is to work for another person for pay. They want to work for purpose. They want meaning. They want to understand why they're there. They won't stay at organizations which are not engaging for them. So empowerment is a common term that we hear often, and yet in traditional empowerment programs, one person with power lends his or her power to another person with less power, a subordinate. And the problem with that scenario is that what has been loaned can be repossessed at any time. And so true empowerment means that we are giving people all the power they need from the first day of work to acquire resources and build relationships and do their best work with freedom and autonomy. And we often talk about my people and her people and his people, and frankly, people don't belong to anyone. People are people. People are human beings. They're not human resources. So this kind of language sort of freezes us into the rigid, bureaucratic command and control mindset. And we have an opportunity to go beyond that and create cultures that allow for collecting the collective intelligence of everyone and allowing for that innovation to spring forth from any place and any time. And it has a lot to do with inclusion and recognizing that people want to be included in decisions that affect them at work, and not simply told that this is the way it's going to be and these are the innovations that you're going to implement. We have to find a way to get beyond command and control language and create cultures that allow innovation to spring forth. And the third point I would say is that we need to embrace new social technologies that expand our respective vocabularies of inclusion. Traditionally, there are a very limited set of social technologies that we use in organizations to create change, to implement, and to innovate. And typically those are meetings, presentations, status reports, facilitated discussions, and open discussions. So we've got 5 basic social technologies, and we try to use, jam all of our initiatives through this limited set of technologies, and it's extremely limiting. It's like trying to communicate in a language that has only 5 letters in the alphabet. And there are tons of other social technologies available, dozens and dozens of them. that we can use to tap into the collective intelligence of a group and to allow voices to be heard and to allow leadership and innovation to spring forth. And some of these are well known, some less known. A typical one is open space or World Cafe. There are probably 40 to 50 social technologies available in a book called Liberating Structures. The elegant set was used by Rod Collins, who was the head of IT at Blue Cross Blue Shield a few years ago, to align 34 or 35 state organizations around a new IT initiative. He said he could not have done it unless he had used this collective intelligence gathering system, which was far beyond the standard social technology of typical meetings. So there are lots of ways to liberate people and help people find their voice in organizations. As a matter of closing, I'll just share this with you. If you were to check this website, this is a periodic table of the future of work. I put this together last December because I wanted to kind of see how the various threads and the tapestry of the future of work were coming together, and there are many of them. And this table is growing by the day, but it's somewhat organized into different domains and areas of interest. So if you wanted to look at new applications, software applications, thought leaders, conferences, authors, books, movements, etc., it's kind of all organized here in a way that you can click through and learn more information as you wish. So creating different kinds of liberating organizations and finding better social technologies these things are very fundamental to creating innovation environments that allow people to thrive and to think up new things that are powerful and deliver big business results. So with that, I'll just tap the brakes and open up for any questions that might be there.
Okay, any questions?
Yes, from Ron. Thank you for the presentation. It reminds me of corporate life, human resources, etc. In my experience, there hasn't been much success with team sites and and getting people to the organization to kind of share information across departmental boundaries. What has your experience been in that world?
Right. Well, it's a great question. If you bake the sharing of information into the cultural DNA, if you make it one of the core principles of the enterprise, to start with, it's quite easy because then people don't even recognize departments. They don't exist. So you have an organization, you have people performing different work. Every individual has a portfolio of business processes for which he or she is fully accountable, and it's really about individuals. So we have maybe functional areas, but there's no sense of this new kind of organization. There's no sense of hoarding information in one department at the expense of the other because there's no benefit in doing so whatsoever.
Does that work better in a certain size of organization? Does it work better in small organizations versus large organizations, or the other way around?
That's a great question. I can tell you the Morningstar scale from 24 in the beginning to now it's 4,000 plus, probably 4,500 total, including seasonal and permanent colleagues. So the principles have never changed, and the basic culture has not changed at all in 28 years. So you can certainly scale up and still adhere to these kinds of principles and reap the kinds of rewards and benefits and results as a result. But is there an optimal size? I don't know. I can tell you that there's a company in Qingdao, China called Haier, and they are the world's largest appliance manufacturer. They have a global presence. They had 80,000 employees a couple of years ago. I think it might be 70,000 now. But they have a very visionary leader, Jean Remin, and he wanted to turn his company into one giant innovation platform. And so he broke the entire company up into 4,000 self-organized innovation teams. And each team is multidisciplinary. So each team of about 20 people has people that have expertise in production, distribution, quality assurance, market research, the whole range of business disciplines. And they are extensively tied into social media and the external world. And they use the Internet of Things in their appliances to collect massive amounts of data analytics that they use to identify opportunities for their products and services. And so when you've got thousands of entrepreneurs out there inside an organization seeking innovation and seeking opportunities, it's a powerful thing. And if any of these teams develops an innovation, they then share in the profits from the sales of whatever innovation they develop. So it's an extremely powerful innovation platform that they've developed, and it makes for a great case study.
So your advice to a CEO would be to really take a very human-centric approach to their organizations and to base their organization, organize their organizations around the idea of people and people working with people.
Yeah, I would look really hard at freedom and autonomy, and I would look at inclusion and making sure that there is at least an opportunity for every voice to be heard. When people have ideas, they need to be respected, they need to be heard, and people need to feel like they're being heard, and it's not just an exercise in another form of kind of corporate giving lip service to the idea of inclusion.
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Kamlesh.
Yes.
Yeah, Doug, I had an observation, like especially in developing countries, normally there is an impression that innovation should and can happen only in R&D department. And, people take undue advantage of that and then somehow make an argument that we are not in R&D department, so we can, or we are authorized to escape that route of innovation. So what do you have to say on this?
Yeah, that's an unfortunate mindset because that's a constraint and it's a limiting factor. If Morningstar had limited its innovation capabilities to a tiny handful of researchers and developers, then it wouldn't have realized but a small fraction of the innovations that it's reaped results from over the years. My example of a maintenance mechanic coming up with a major process change is not atypical, it's very typical. So people want to be creative. They want their voices to be heard. They want to have their brains back at work. And when they have those opportunities and the organization listens to them, it's an incredible thing. And I think Hire is experiencing that right now. And they're on a very exciting journey, and it's going to be fun to watch them as they develop over the next few years. But, they were nearly dead 25 years ago, and now they're the world's largest manufacturer of appliances and the most profitable as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, hi, this is Joel. I've got a quick one. Like I said in my intro, I've worked at a couple different organizations doing fundamentally a very similar role in very similar categories. Some organizations, all organizations have different risk tolerances. Some have more of a culture of, which is definitely a top-down culture. You know, take safe risks. If you fail quickly, mitigate the damage, and by all means, don't do that again. Whereas other companies, like, you know, to be honest, where I am now, will absolutely pass on numerous successes in order to avoid any failure whatsoever. You know, just completely different risk tolerances. So given that that culture comes from top down, those of us that aren't at the top, do you have any sort of words of advice on how we can sort of navigate these different cultures and still try to get the you know, the innovations that we think could work but are not risk-free, get them progressing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, in a sense, it all starts with philosophy, right? So you have to recognize that all leaders make choices, and their choices derive from free will, and they have to deal with reality as they see it. But at some point, they have to exercise acts of courage and decide, you know, what they're going to do. And so, and that actually applies to everyone. So when I coach people, one of my power questions is, what acts of courage are you personally going to engage in the next 6 months? And, you know, even if you're in an organization that has a kind of command and control mindset, you have a choice about how you can address that. You can meekly go along and not rock the boat and accept the rigidity and the bureaucracy and choose to live with it, or if you get sick of it at some point, leave. Or you can choose to try your own experiments. So how much freedom do you actually have? I mean, if you're a manager, a supervisor in an organization that's a pyramidal structure, surely there are ways that you can get together informally with people, either on-site or off-site, and find ways to experiment in small ways with incremental change, and expand your circle of freedom, your zone of freedom, in such a way that, you know, if you're successful, if you can find results and demonstrate them, then even rigid command and control leaders might find ways to support you and to allow you to expand your experiments and propagate your ideas. So everyone has to make a choice. You know, are you going to work within the system and courageously try to find more opportunities, or are you going to opt out and go find a better sandbox to play in? That's ultimately the choice of every single individual.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, that's Emmanuel.
Go ahead, Manuel.
Yeah, I need to find out if there are other words we could use to capture all he has said today, like the issue of work organization and organizational structure. They affect how innovations are generated in a firm. So if people's work are basically departmental issues, very functional structure, not in other ways of structures, you find us idea generations. Ideas don't flow across departments. They are quite structured in those forms. So it kind of inhibits idea generation and idea sharing. So are there other words in which you can capture these things he has said to communicate to some companies, like Kamlesh said, in developing countries you have firms and they have structurally HR departments and they operate command control form of management. So how do we conceptualize them into structures or terms which are familiar to people who practice traditional organizational management?
Well, thank you for your question. I wish I had a pithy answer, and I'm not sure I do. I can share that I literally just got back from working with an oil and gas supplier, equipment supplier in Siberia, and everything with the staff of that organization was done through a translator. And I found that they were just as receptive to the ideas that I've been discussing this morning as any progressive business leader in the United States or anywhere else around the world. So yeah, I'm sure there's a process that one must go through to find the right language for each and every individual culture in which one works, but it's probably sort of an individual exercise depending on where you're going and who you're talking to.
Okay. With that, I'd like to wrap it up and turn this over to Ron Porter. Having said that, if you have any other questions, you can address them to directly to Doug after the meeting. When I send out the summary, I'll send you his email information, and you can send additional questions to him at that time. Okay. Okay. Okay, Ron, I've turned it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, maybe in a few cases. My name is Ron Porter. I just recently started my own consulting firm around innovation and change. I've spent most of my 37 years in doing work in that area, most recently at a leadership development company where I've pretty much taught people how to innovate all over the world. And I would agree with you, Doug, that it doesn't, the language, the concepts pretty much resonated anywhere I was, and I taught anywhere from the UK to Kazakhstan to Singapore to Moldova, Indonesia. It didn't matter. The concept seemed to be resonating with people, and the thirst and the eagerness to learn how to be more innovative or learn the process of innovation was something that was very universal. This just happens to be one of my fixer-upper homes around the world that you're seeing a picture of right now.
It reminds me of growing up in the Bronx.
Yeah, it's very much so. Very much so. Anyway, yeah, I spent a lot of time actually in Greece too. So I think one of the things about Greece is I don't think they quite use innovation as effectively as they could be, since they actually had one of the most innovation ideas in the world called democracy a long time ago. So Doug, it's interesting you're talking about Morningstar. I spent a lot of time listening to Gary Hamel talk about that same topic and the difference, and it's fun to watch a group of traditional managers listen to the things that Morningstar did and watch the disbelief on their face, but then actually see that the results actually did happen, and this company is existing and not existing, but thrive and flourish throughout the years. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about here is I have 10 key points that just to me came up when I was thinking about what were some of the challenges I would run into when leaders would say we want a culture of innovation. And first off, I'd ask them, is that the right thing to even focus on, a culture of innovation? And what were some of the things that they tended not to do, or one of the things that I found is that people have a lot of myths and misperceptions about innovation. So I spent a lot of time trying to dispel those myths. So I think these 10 things are part of that process too. So my first thing, very practically, was I would always want to hear them want to talk about the culture, and I'd always say that's not the right place to start. The first thing that I think you really need to start with, and the successes that I've had, is really start with a common practice. This gets to some of the common language you were talking about, Doug. It's a common practice that everybody gets and understands. And I'm going to use everybody in quotes because I really don't mean everybody right off the bat, because that's going to be my second point. But a process, and the process that I tended to teach was a combination of IDEO's design thinking and Clayton Christensen and Insight's jobs to be done and growth through innovation models, because both of them have really good things. But I think once you get people focused on a process and start using the process to success, it actually starts the process of building a culture that would move in that direction. Joel, you asked earlier about the concept of risk and failure. If you my experience has been, if you use a really solid process that understands what it really means to innovate, you actually remove the risk of failure continually throughout the process, so that at the end, there's always a risk of failure of anything, and I'm going to use failure in quotes too, but there's always a risk of failure of anything, because you may get it done, and then all of a sudden you're ready to come out to the marketplace and your competitor just launched it 2 days beforehand or something like that. But the risk of failure tends to reduce and reduce over time if you do the process right and you do your homework. So I always get people to start on using a common process, which leads to my second point, is not going too broad too fast. My experience has been that when organizations CEO says, I want to make this, and most of the organizations I work with were not startups. They were existing organizations that had to change. That when a division president or CEO says, we want to build this culture of innovation, we'll start in this division, let's go do it in that division. My experience has been it's just too overwhelming, because they're also trying to keep the wheels on the bus while it's moving and continue to deliver on their short-term results while they're trying to change the way they do all the things in their organization, both internally and externally. Because when I talk about using the innovation processes, I don't just mean using it externally, I also mean using it internally to innovate your own way you do business, business models and processes like that. So one of the things that I found is that it's easier to create innovation champions who know this process and actually work on real projects that haven't been solved, even if they've tried to been solved in the past, work on real projects and apply those processes real time to those solutions and come up with answers that actually are better than the ones that have come before. Many times I've worked on projects where the organization has said, yeah, we've tried to fix that one. Yeah, we've actually had 3 teams over the last 10 years do that. Nobody's come up with anything. And 9 times out of 10, well, okay, 8 times out of 10, I'd say, more realistically, we've applied an innovation process and basically have solved things that they haven't been able to solve in not very long time frames. Most of the projects that I've worked on, I've tried to get people to do them in 3 to 4 months, or at least the initial scoping of the project is something they could get done to that level. So I think one of the things is to make sure that instead of trying to go broad right away, let's do something that we learned from innovation. Let's experiment with a small group of people and turn them into innovation champions that know the process and can actually start to act as internal champions and consultants on how to do things. I think the third thing is that my experience with leaderships has been they come in and they want to take what they're doing and make it better, and that's great, and that's all well and good, but their mindset is internal out, not external in. And if I could tell a CEO to do one thing, I would just say, let's work on getting your organization to have a customer-centric mindset and not an internal what we do mindset. Because once you get people to think about things from the customer's perspective, and actually I wouldn't even focus necessarily calling it innovation, I would call it how do we create customer-centric mindsets, because that leads to a whole lot of things, including innovation. It also leads to better customer experiences, which can also be applied to innovation. So I think the focus is on how do we figure out what the challenges and problems are. And some of the techniques that, are the observational ones that we get out of design thinking or better understanding of the jobs to be done in the Christensen world is really going out and spending more time with the customer, not just talking with them, but visiting, seeing, and the show me technique. When they want to do something, have them show you how they do things. Those are the things that actually get into better understanding of how they innovate, not necessarily just generating the idea piece. Because I think we start too often with either a solution mind or a solution that we already have and just try to make that better. And again, all that stuff's good and well, but it doesn't go back to the core, which is what's that customer's issue? Why are they trying to get it done? And when they go to make selection decisions from the choices they have, what's the most important criteria that they use in order to make those decisions? And when we're in innovation, to me, what you're looking for and what you're teaching people to look for, and what I teach CEOs and leaders to look for, is where do the customers say, I can't get the result I want the way I want because what exists doesn't do it today. That, to me, is that conversation leads into innovation, and getting people to have that conversation more broadly really is getting people to think about things on the way customers experience things, not the way the organization puts it out to customers as they should experience things. The fourth one is diverse perspectives beat the experts. And this goes a little bit back to one of the things that Doug was talking about inclusion. And one of the definitions that in the other company I used to work for in leadership development, we use the word inclusion is basically being able to bring your authentic and unique self to work and then use that in a way that helps the business. I think that's that's absolutely critical to this. I also think that too often, in my experience in dealing with leaders, they depend on the experts to solve problems. So for example, whenever I structured a project with a group of leaders to teach them the process, to create these innovation champions, nobody on the team could actually have expertise in the actual problem they were solving. And you got better solutions. And I would say, like I said earlier, 80 to 90% of the time, the actual solutions that came up got implemented by the organization. And the reason is experts think a certain way. And they have biases. We all have biases, but their experts become biases. And also they tend to become the default on the team. When you have an expert and the team wants to work on something, they go to the expert to understand really what's going on. And experts know limitations. And that's one of the things that can get in the way of innovation, is the experts will tell you why you can't do things. And when you think about it, a lot of the breakthrough things is people didn't necessarily have those understanding the technical details. The technical stuff comes later on how to make it work. But too often up front, it becomes the starting point, and as a result, innovative ideas get killed quickly. So to me, it's about putting those, being inclusive and getting people's best perspectives and opinions. But I also think there's two other pieces of this that too often we don't talk about as broadly, and it's not just about some of the obvious diverse perspectives like functional perspectives, but also thinking about the way people work. So for example, I want to make sure a team has someone who's creative, but I also want them to be paired up with someone who is actually really obnoxiously diligent about execution. Those two people tend to hate each other the same way analytical people tend to hate people that are relational. And I'm using hate as a figurative word here. They don't necessarily feel comfortable with each other, but that's the kind of diverse perspectives that actually breed better results and breakthrough thinking, at least in my experience again. The other thing is, I got two popped up at the same time. All right. So the other one to me is culture is only a piece of it. And when people talk about culture, and I think, some of you were already talking about this, culture to me is not just about starting with a cultural piece. There's lots of other pieces like the org structure, the way the company's led, the performance measures, the goals and objectives, the systems and processes in organization. Those aren't necessarily cultural elements, but all this stuff has to fit together in the piece. So to me, the culture is only one piece of it if all the other systems don't fit together, way jobs are structured, all that stuff, the processes are structured. So again, when they talk about culture, I don't care what organizational model you use. The organization I used to work for, we had 8 major factors that we looked at as an organization. Whatever those are, all of those levers need to be pushed in order for this, quote, culture of innovation to be explored. Joe, you were talking about this one too. Failure is always an option. And, Doug, you were talking about the courage stuff, and I believe all that stuff is important too. But I also think that the word failure, and we go back to this risk, and you get the risk profile. The word failure is the wrong word. And I think when we talk about fail sooner to succeed sooner, or fail often to succeed sooner, failure's got a negative connotation to it. And when I think about the things that don't work, it's not that they don't work. They don't work the way we expected them to. That's a different mindset to me. So I think the word failure needs to come out of the lexicon of innovation. And there's got to be a different word, because the only failure is not to learn from what didn't work the way you thought it was going to work. And to me, that's a huge difference. And so I think part of what I think, Joe, and we can talk about this after we're done. I think what you're talking about is people think about that failure and it goes out and it looks a bad mark on your name. And when you say failure, yeah, it does. But that word is just the wrong word. And I don't know what, and honestly, I don't know what the right word is yet. But I think we need to change that word, because I think it would change the tone of the conversations. And interestingly enough, you know, my experience with working with pharmaceutical companies is on the R&D side of the business, that concept is well known, because scientists are experimenting all the time and they have no idea whether or not something's going to come out the way they want it to do. And when it doesn't, they just go to a different route. But on the commercial side, that's like an anathema. Don't do that, because now you screwed it up. And that dichotomy is an interesting one. It's not the only industry, but it is one I've seen in the pharma industry that is pretty pronounced. The other thing I think is give it time. Or as I say, I've had conversations with leaders which basically would say something like, okay, we got this data. Let's get in a room and, you know, let's give it an hour. And let's brainstorm and we'll come up with some great ideas, then we'll go out and we'll test them. I'm like, really? In the history of the world, this problem hasn't been solved, but we think that in an hour of brainstorming, we're going to get there. And, you know, I'm using that as a figurative example, but I think part of the problem here is that if you really want to innovate, you got to give people the time to innovate. And whether it's planned time to work on innovative ideas, or whether it's time that basically says, hey, we know that we're going to attack an innovation portfolio where maybe 70% of what we do is just improving what we already do, but we got to dedicate some time to this other world out here where we can go deeper and explore. And so in this world of everything has to be faster doesn't make it happen in innovation. By the way, and I'm not suggesting that you can't do like things like lean innovation and all aren't great ideas and they work, because they do. But I think the mindset from a leadership standpoint is there. The speed is way over expected in an area where I go back to, it's never been solved yet. Why would we think we're going to just solve it in an hour, figuratively? The other piece to me is, and this has been something that I've been harping on for 30-some years, 37 years now, is I still believe that most employees don't understand their own businesses well enough to be able to use that context in order to innovate in a better way. And so getting people to better understand the businesses. One of the ways that I've done that, go back to earlier, is when we work on projects and don't put an expert on the project. By the way, when I say that, that doesn't mean they don't have access to experts to better understand, because I do believe in the idea concept of looking at extreme users and getting the expert's opinion and getting the non-expert's opinions both. So both are important. And I'm not suggesting they aren't, but it's at the right times. But when I put them on those processes, part of the outcomes is they get to learn more about their own businesses that they didn't know before, and that actually does, to me, lead to better solutions the next time around, because the next time they get to do this, they'll get that same concept and understanding. And you were talking about this earlier too, Doug, so I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but collaboration to me is critical. It goes back to the innovations can't come down from the top because of the executives having the insightful experience, especially with their customers, is probably not happening. Excuse me, it's usually somebody down lower in the organization that's had the interaction and insightful experience. But I also think the other piece here is that it ain't just internal, and for those of you where English is not your first language, ain't is just another word of saying is not. So it's not just internal. And I think the other critical aspect is trying to get CEOs and leaders to understand that this is a new world, that people that used to be your competitors or your suppliers, or even, God forbid, you actually collaborate with your customers, this is a different way of working. And so, yeah, that organization may be your competitor, but in this one, they're your partner. Getting that concept across, getting people to make that leap is a hard one, especially if the mindset has always been, we want to beat that. I would always picture, like when I say that, sometimes try to picture, what would that look like if Pepsi and Coke actually collaborated? That would, I just think, be like hysterically funny, because that will obviously never happen because they're so entrenched against each other. But when you're thinking about innovation now, and because a lot of platforms are out there technology-wise to be able to do this, the whole concept of open innovation is really around collaboration. It's not just internal. And so I think broadening that out to more organizations, that they understand that concept and be able to understand what kinds of challenges might be ones that they can't solve internally, because not everything, but some challenges are best solved internally. I learned that from one of my partners and colleagues, Steve Shapiro, when in his book, Best Practices Are Stupid. There's a lot of concepts, including the one about the expertise is the enemy of innovation, but the concept of looking at your challenge and what you're trying to do and figuring out what is the best way to do that. And he's got a little bit of a matrix on how to figure that out. But some of the challenges are not best done by you internally, and just recognizing that. I think the last thing I just want to talk about was really that basically recognize, which a lot of the leaders I've talked to give lip service to, but the key point to me is the parentheses, and accept that innovation is a messy process. Leaders like predictability. It's why we go back to this failure thing. In innovation, it doesn't work that way, and you got to be comfortable with ambiguity, and you got to be comfortable with understanding that if you're going to walk this path, understand that sometimes it's going to get uncomfortable, but you got to stay true to the path. So those are just, my hardest thing was trying to keep this to 10, but those are just 10 things that I've found as things that leaders either come in with as preconceived notions or myths or misperceptions about innovation that I've spent time trying to turn around. And again, the thing to me is that it's about pretty much anywhere in the world that I've done this. Is similar kinds of things have come up.
Okay, any questions for Ron?
Or are you just hungry for lunch for those of you that are on East Coast time?
Hi. I have.
Go ahead, Kamlesh.
Yeah. Excellent presentation, very to the point, and very much applicable to at least this part of the world. One thing
I've been in India. I've been in India a few times. Yeah, I get it.
Yes,
but by the way, one thing before I forget, Kamlesh, don't forget your question. But I think your point about constraints is a really important one too. I mean, because to me, I hear people say, well, we're really constrained, and I'll say to them, awesome, you're perfect for innovation, and then I get that look like, are you crazy? Or, hey, we're really risk intolerant. And I'm like, awesome, you're perfect for innovation. So I think that's another key thing to keep in mind. So sorry, but I didn't want to lose that thought.
I agree. One thing that I thought both of you missed out, especially so far as innovation discussion is concerned, is, the return on innovation. That means how successful the innovation is. There are some criteria. And unfortunately, I find that across the world, the criteria are all mostly financials.
Mm-hmm.
So can we not come up with some criteria where innovation success is measured in terms which are not related to finance at all? And I don't see this happening anywhere, even in advanced countries.
Yeah. My experience has been it's always going to be financial as a primary driver at some point. I think what I've seen is that too often and too early in the process, financial takes over. And so when I see stuff like stage gates, which really, the stage gate kind of innovation is not really an innovation process. It's a process in which to figure out whether or not you're going to continue to allocate budgeting. And that's a different issue to me. But what I've seen is, and again, for most part, I've worked for for-profit organizations, so a financial return at some point has got to be an important part of that. I think the critical thing to me is, when is that critical financial return point And second is, are you giving it enough time? Because what happens, what I've seen happen is people want to evaluate the innovative idea in the same, using the same financial criteria that they use to evaluate everything else. And you can't do that when it comes to innovation, because people want to put their money where they're going to have their highest profits. And again, I'm talking about organizations that exist and want to change, not necessarily startups. And what happens is that then they start to kill things too soon. So I think the hard thing is to agree up front, how much time are we going to, do we really anticipate? You know, I think Christensen's got this one right. He basically said, it's impossible to predict the financial success of a new idea. All you can be is directionally correct. And if you look at the way he's, you know, his process that we used to teach, I used to teach a lot, it's all about what is the magnitude of the savings, how much revenue return, how much productivity you gain over what period of time, and just be directionally correct. Because every time you go to make sharper predictions and budgeting around your idea, it's a fallacy, because people try to spend too much time on trying to figure out the number, and what they should be figuring out is, are my assumptions correct to get me to that number? And to me, and that's one of the things that I've taught people, is you got to challenge all your assumptions about your idea to get to that, to get to whatever outcome you want, and figure out a way to test them, because the high risk assumptions are the ones that will kill you. You have to go there first. So I know I probably didn't answer your question, but I'm sure there's other elements. It's just that I haven't, you know, most of the things I've done have been in the profit world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Ron, this is JC Paradise. Got a question following up on that. When I started my career back in Bell Laboratories in the R&D community, we had forward-looking work, which was kind of protected. In your observation, have you seen any companies anywhere that are using kind of like a protected fund to say, okay, this is the innovation fund for this year, to kind of protect those people and the work from being, you know, cut?
I mean, that's exactly what I recommend to people. Jesse, I say, if you're going to do something, you got to set aside a pool of money that is not touchable, because the temptation is always, we're starting to come under attack on our core business, and we could really use that money, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you got to put the wall up there, guys. That's got to be a firewall. It's, you know, treat it like a trust. Once it goes in, it can only come out for one thing. And so, you know, have I seen a lot of people do it? No, unfortunately. Have I seen more people starting to think about doing it? I agree. You know, what you were saying, that, see, look at Bell Labs, they were all, obviously you guys were progressive at the time, and that concept's a good one. I laugh because sometimes we look at all this stuff and say, well, that's old. One of my colleagues came up with one of the best lines I ever heard one time, because the guy was challenging like Cotter's model and saying, oh, that concept's old. And he looked him dead in the eye and he said, you know what, the alphabet's pretty old, but it's pretty damn useful still. And I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is look back on some of the old useful concepts and say, how can we still apply some of that stuff? And I think that's one of them. Segregated funds, that's not a new concept. But do we do it? No. It's a great point.
Great, thanks.
This is David Modeste.
Hey, David.
I just wanted to follow up on the previous two questions with respect to a metric that is non-financial. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the comments on innovation talk about inclusiveness. So there's definitely a people aspect to innovation, in the sense that if you look at a company, let's say a large company, you have highly technical employees, highly professional employees, but there's also a non-technical side. And a lot of times when you look at employee surveys, whether it's on whatever side, you see people talking about the fact that they don't feel that they're being used to the full potential of their capabilities. So innovation provides one way for people to sort of give that aspect. So whilst let's say the business side of the company might be looking at, oh, we had a brainstorming session, we got 100 ideas, and this one idea gave a return of 50%. Now,
how do we look at how innovation impacts the people and how that will in turn motivate them to do more. That could be also sort of a metric in the sense of how are we utilizing the people to actually come forward and feel part, not only included, but actually feel that they can contribute.
I think it's a great idea. I think, there's, when I was talking about financial, I think ultimately that's what people look at. But along the way, I think there's other measures to look at. I think that's one good one. I think, how many actual projects did we generate in an innovative way? How many of those actually went to the next step? Part of me, one of the things that is, again, this is totally against what most organizations that I've experienced think, is you actually reward people for effort, not just result. And that's a mindset sometimes that gets hard to break. But in innovation, if you don't reward effort, you will not get result. So any of those kind of measures too, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but in Shapiro's book, Best Practices Are Stupid, he actually talks about 4 different types of measures. And unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank right now, but all 4 of them are good, and only one of them is financial. And a lot of them deal with this concept of either what do we learn, or how many, how did we try, right? And how many got translated into something that was moving forward, things like that. So I think those are other things to think about too. Because part of this is about, to me, it's about going back to encouraging people, right? If organizations that have positive encouragement, and that's part of one of the things about it, driving inclusivity, are ones that tend to have better results. And so that's part of the encouragement. Again, my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just if there is a time, I would like just to comment on a few of the points from Ron's presentation. This is Anita from CSI.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, I have been working for companies small and big, global, and really, let's say, global company like Nestle. The ideas can come from everyone, even from the front receptionist desk, and I really appreciated that innovation culture. Regarding, let's say, point 9, collaboration, internal, external, money were not the issue. So what we prompted a collaboration between Purina pet food and Gerber baby food. Many scientists, experts tried to the point, great experts were negative, with negative opinions about that. What's the mutual things between baby and pet? But if you think baby food and pet foods are very similar, it means you cannot get response from babies, you cannot get response from pets. They are you just need to follow their facial expressions to read, are they satisfied with the food or not? And that ended up in a great collaboration, a lot of innovations. And now both these companies, Purina and Gerber, are Nestle companies. Yeah. So yes, sometimes money are the issue and they limit the innovation, but let's see, if the resources are great, I think we need to be open-minded. Ideas can come from everywhere. And like this example, Gerber with Purina pet food, it was great. Time, yes. If I'm limited, for some people, the pressure, the deadlines are making them more productive, but sometimes the time limitation, how to say, reduces the innovations output. The diversity, as I said, the point for number 4 in your presentation, again, diversity, outsiders' opinions are very important. Sometimes expert scientists are caught up in our own practices, what we have learned, what we have done for years. But some fresh ideas are always welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. If I can say one more thing on the time frame too, because I also don't want to give the impression that it's like you have unlimited time because you take all the time you need in the world and then eventually you're out of business. I don't mean that at all. But I think what happened, you got to put time pressures on because this process goes back to this process is messy. So you have to put some sort of time limit on. I think that what I've seen happen is that we just put time limits on that are too short rather than giving things a chance to go. And I love your example about the dog food and baby food. And I think it's, I think what we need to do more of is just understand that all those different disciplines when you bring them into the process, may have something parallel to what's going on in your world, and you would never know that because you don't know that discipline. And I just read a book, I can't think of the name of it, Mapping Innovation by Greg Siddell. And his book is all full of all that stuff. It's all about how he was talking about time after time after time how different types of innovation occurred because people would bring in different disciplines that had nothing to do with the actual thing. And but what they did do is they had ideas or techniques or similar issues that they solved a way that could be cross-applied. And I think that's a great thing that we don't use enough of either. So.
Yeah, and I have another example. A few years ago, I entered the ophthalmic industry, and all the people, oh, we are not doing it this way. The lenses are not done in this way. Ophthalmic lenses, spectacles, or contact lenses with that. And I, as a material scientist, let's try this material from this industry outside of the ophthalmic. And I ended up every month with some innovation, patent filing, and etc. But sometimes people expert, and I very much respect the experts, you know, we are so much caught up in our own practices. We need to be more open-minded. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I also think, the experts obviously play a role because there's one role that they absolutely play, which is once you get the idea to a certain point, can you actually do it?
Yes.
That's, you know, but what I've seen is where experts will too soon kill an idea. So it's always, there's always need experts to help it as part of that team. It's just when do you bring them into the process, to me, is part of the conversation. So.
Agree. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we need to cut it off there because we're already running a little bit late. Just real quick, does anyone have any other ideas that they would like to throw out to the group in terms of what they would recommend to a CEO or a divisional president to help encourage the creation of a sustainable innovation culture? Okay, I would just bring up one point. I'm a strong believer in strategic focus for innovation, and that innovation strategy should be developed from the bottom up in order to get the ideas and get the expertise of the organization fully enrolled and aligned to those focus areas. But having said that, I also think a really good innovation strategy should lay out criteria for how would when would a company consider ideas that fall outside of that strategy? What's the criteria for doing that? Because occasionally someone does have an idea for a great business that doesn't fall within the strategy. All right, and if the organization doesn't have a criteria for that and a process for that, those ideas get lost and they get beaten down. So if companies want to have great breakthroughs and to really broaden their growth, having criteria for what, when would they consider an idea that falls outside of the strategy or the strategic focus areas helps a great deal. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, Ron, and
thanks, Arthur,
and Doug, and
thank you.
They were great presentations, and we had a great discussion. Again, this session has been recorded, and I will make it available to everyone who's registered, and eventually also submit it to the innovation leaders private community on the network so that all the innovation leaders can get access to it. Okay? Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.